Hey everybody, welcome back to our permaculture series. This week I want to talk to you about observing nature. Now that you have a basic understanding of what the zones are in permaculture, we actually need to take a step backwards and talk about what our first interaction with the land is going to be. Let's say you just found a piece of property that you've decided on buying, and you're ready to start putting your house on the property or other structures. You're ready to interact with the land, maybe make a garden, plant some of your own trees. The first thing we need to do before we get too excited about this new piece of property is observe what's already there, because we might be surprised what we find. We actually lived on this property for 2 years before we discovered that we had black walnut trees. A black walnut's one of those things where it's kind of a curse and a benefit. It's a benefit because it's a natural tree that we have on the property that produces a food that we can eat. But at the same time, there's limitations to what we can plant nearby to a black walnut tree. But not knowing that, we may well have come in here and simply cut down the trees, trying to use them for firewood or anything else, and have never realized that we could have had the benefit of having the fruit off of them as well. So, when I talk about observing nature, we need to first slow down and take a walk around and look and see exactly what's on our property. Now I know for me that's not something that I could do and get it right the first time. For example, I didn't recognize a black walnut tree just because it was there. I had to actually find a walnut on the ground and ask myself, where the heck did this come from? And then in doing that, we were able to identify the tree it came from, and then walk around the property and see dozens of these black walnut trees. We've also run across situations where I've just taken a picture of a pretty flower and gone and asked people, what's this? And come to find out it's a wild potato vine, where it's a tuber that we could actually eat. It's growing here all by itself. So before we start cultivating something and thinking that we can turn it into something better, we need to take that step back and find out what exactly it is first, because nature may already be providing for what we need. So first thing to do is to take that walk around and observe. Now, you might not realize what you're looking at. Something as simple as taking a walk around in spring, you might not easily recognize a fruit or a nut tree because it's not in fruit. You might walk around in the middle of summer and not realize what kind of wildlife is there because so many of them are bedding down and only moving around at night. But if we take the time to observe things over time, even just ask our neighbors what they know is in the area, then we can maybe make some better decisions on where we're going to put things on our property, where our different permaculture zones are going to be, rather than find out later that we decided to put something in what seemed to be the best spot, and 5 years down the road we discover we could have put it in another place and been doing 10 times better the results. So walk around your property and look for signs of animals. Look for their nests, their dens. Look for the scrapes and scratches of things that might indicate to you what wildlife is already there naturally. If you don't know what the plants are, ask somebody. Here in the United States and in our local area, I can go to the county extension service and ask them what a particular plant or animal is, and usually get a result right away. Sometimes it's as simple as going on Facebook and joining a group of knowledgeable people and putting the information out there. With one caveat, always double check what their answers are. Some people don't take the time to research, they just give you an answer that really turns out to be their opinion. So if you put a picture of a plant out there and they come back and tell you it's a hibiscus, go actually research hibiscus and discover whether or not what you posted a picture of is really what is matching with what they're trying to tell you that it is. So now that you have a general idea for what wildlife is in your area and what plants might be growing, you can do things like mark off trees to make sure that you don't clear them out if you're going to try to make any kind of pasture area. You can do things like mark where wild vines are growing that are a benefit to you so that you leave those areas alone. Maybe these areas stay your zone 5 that you let grow naturally, or maybe these areas turn into your zone 4 where you know those wild edibles are going to be that you can harvest from later. It's an extra benefit to you because now you've already mapped out these areas, and come harvest time you don't have to walk your entire property wondering where you're going to harvest that wild potato vine, for example. You can walk right to it and harvest it. The next thing is sunlight. Now it seems fairly obvious, but here in the northern hemisphere, if you live on the north side of a tall hill, you're not going to get as much light as somebody who lives on the south side of the hill. And the more light that you have, the more options are available to you, whether it's growing plants or storing that energy to turn around and make electricity with it. The key here is to simply observe where you do receive light. If you're interested in something like making solar power, then you want to make sure that you've got the most clear amount of sky available to you in order to capture that energy. If you're interested in having a garden, like a food forest, then maybe you don't need direct sunlight for everything, but instead you can turn around and plan for what kind of plants will grow in the amount of light that you have. It makes no sense to avoid looking at just how much light you receive just to go and plant something that requires full sun and find out that all you ever have in that part of your yard is part sun all day long. You won't get the kind of results that you're looking for. The sun is also an important thing to consider when it comes to just how high it is in the summer and how low it is in the winter, because that'll allow you to do things like save energy in your home by putting your trees and your home in a certain way so that you can cast shade when you need it, but let the light through when you don't. The next thing I want you to consider is the wind. Every area is going to have different prevailing winds or predominant winds, simply depending on where you are in the globe. And they're going to be different depending on what type of the year it is. The best thing for you to do is to look for the local weather service where you live. And you can try to find that information by going to a website or trying to even contact your local news service and ask them where you can find this information. Most people aren't going to be bothered by the simple question of, hey, I'm trying to do a project on my property and I'm really trying to find out which way the winds come from in winter and which way the winds come from in summer. The person I asked answered that question within 2 minutes and I was back off the phone. The reason it's important to you is it can help you decide how you're going to situate your house, as well as what kind of windbreaks or barriers you're going to put up to block winds. In our area, for example, we typically get a northern wind in the winter. So I want to have trees on the northern side of my property to help block that cold, bitter wind that's going to cool off my house and cool down my vegetables too early. However, in the summer, it's more from the west or southwest. So I want to make sure that I can have availability of windows in my home to let the breeze through to help cool down the house. Another thing for you to consider is water. And it's kind of an ironic topic because it's been raining on and off today and I'm barely getting to squeeze in even making this video for the week. But water is obviously extremely important, not only to your survival, but for that of any animal and plant that you have on your property. And the biggest thing that I want to stress to you is that every inch or centimeter of your property is water catchment. Whether that water is going to go directly into the soil or land on a roof and eventually drain into some sort of water catchment system or be directed into an area where you can use it best, water anywhere on your land is hitting a water catchment area. It's simply a matter of you taking the initiative to make the most use of it. So you need to observe how water is going to flow on your property. If it's a piece of property that's not been used before, or is generally woodland or prairie even, you can go out and look for the signs of runoff or the valleys that are created by where the water runs. And that can help you plan. For example, if you find a small ravine where you can tell water is running off that goes from north to south, and you can put a catchment, some type of swale or berm near the bottom edge of that, so that you're going to get sunlight on that area, but also catch the water as it's running down the hill. You're going to be able to put more water into the soil so that you can plant any variety of vegetation that you want in that area more successfully than you would if you had just planted in that area and not tried to catch the water. The next thing I want to talk to you about is soil. Soil health and soil management are a pretty important thing to me. And as far as your planting purposes go, you need to think about how the water is going to flow into your soil, what interaction the water has with what's above the soil, and where it's going to go once it's underneath the surface of the ground. So all that's to say that if you have a vegetable or a fruit garden that you're top dressing with nutrients such as compost or animal manures, that is not just going to go directly down into your garden. It's also going to flow underneath the soil and fertilize things that are downhill from it. So plan for that. You can make use of the nutrients that you're providing in the garden downhill outside of the garden. Maybe it's in a pasture land or in an orchard or further gardens that are downhill. I know this hasn't gone in depth into how you can use each different system, because there's a dozen different ways that light is important, and a dozen different ways that wind is important, and a dozen different ways and methods of water catchment and systems to retain water, and a whole lot more in depth that we can get into about soil management. But it's important to make notice of these basics of the design as you start designing your permaculture site. Because if we focus on where the light is, then we can be more in tune with nature, and we don't have to necessarily do things like chop down a bunch of trees to make light in a certain area, when light might have been available somewhere else. We might be able to not use air conditioning in our home if we can do something like place our house in line with where the winds are going to blow so that we can create a breeze through the house. We can take ourselves entirely off a need for municipal water if we can learn the ways of capturing water to make use of it for our personal use and for the use of our animals and plants. And if we understand how water flows underground, then we can better plan for where we're going to place certain things on our property and get the most out of every ounce of nutrient that's flowing there. I hope you guys can walk away with a little bit of information from this, and we'll get more into depth as we continue on in our permaculture series. Thank you all for joining, and we'll see you next week.